So lovely to be here, and thank you Siobhan and Kelly for a lovely welcome. I'm just going to start moving through the slides and we'll talk you through them as the evening goes on. So Siobhan, this is just for you to finish up if there's any more things that need to be done in your welcome. And that's the quilt there. You can probably see it behind me. And that's the amazing quilt the contributors made that is the front cover of the book. So is there anything else we forgot to say?
I don't think so. I think the only thing I suppose I'd like to say, and I think it'll probably be said a few times, Caroline, is just it's important for people to look after themselves tonight. You know, we're going to be talking about some really difficult emotions for people, and I want this to be a safe space for everybody. I want people to feel that they can learn and share with one another. So please do use the chat. Please do respect one another's needs within the chat, and you're all welcome here. That's really, I suppose, what we wanted to say.
So we're going to try and get this done in an hour. It's a very tight programme, and then at the end people can stay on for the Q&A if they want to. Okay, so Kelly, would you like to just run us through just some of the things, how to use the chat tonight, please?
Yeah, of course. So I think most people are using the chat, which is great. So what the chat's for is general comments on the evening. You could perhaps post about remembering a loved one. You could make a pledge of action using the hashtag #TheyDiedWaitingPledge, and Caroline will share those later. You could ask a generic question, although the chat does move quite fast. So if there's any specific questions on the bottom of your screen or the side, depending on how you're viewing the webinar, use the Q&A. We've got the ability to type an answer to you on there, or your question might be answered live. And then you can also put any interesting links that you think are useful in the chat, and we'll be doing the same. We'll be sending links, and then we've got the ability to download the chat a little bit later on, and then we can also email everybody who's attended as well. So that's what we'll be using the chat for tonight. Like I say, chat for generic stuff and Q&A for specific stuff, because there's a lot of people here tonight and there's a lot of information and it does go very fast. So yeah, please do use the chat, and that's how we're going to communicate with each other.
Thank you, Kelly. And just to reiterate, please don't direct message me because I will not see them, but I promise I will look at everything that goes in the chat after the event. Siobhan.
Thank you, Caroline. So it's a beautiful picture there of the two of you in front of the quilt, which is the front cover of the book. But I think I'm just going to ask Emma to introduce herself. I can see you've got your mic on, Emma. I wondered if you might perhaps tell us about the reason the book came about.
Thanks. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. So I've been a founder member of the local mental health campaign, and I've known Caroline for some time, and she decided that after she wrote He Died Waiting about the loss of her son Tim, we needed to find a way to safely try and engage and work with the numerous people that contacted Caroline after she wrote He Died Waiting. I think what struck me, there's lots struck me about Caroline's first book, but talking about whispered lives, the stigma and shame around mental health related deaths. And I'm not just talking about suicide, but any mental health related death, particularly if an inquest doesn't give the family answers that they were looking for. There might still be some unknowns if it's complicated by alcohol or drug use or neglect or barriers to accessing physical health care. All of those things and some of those voices and those stories are hidden. So our hope really was for people to be heard and seen and to feel less isolated and silenced. We wanted to be able to connect people so that they felt less alone, but ultimately we want change. Some of the stories we hear, the things that have happened are absolutely disgraceful. This is harm that has happened in plain sight, often with people asking very clearly for help, and that help hasn't been there. So fundamentally what we want to do is agitate for change and get that that change. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Emma. Do you want to just talk us through just double checking that everybody's going to be emotionally safe tonight, please?
Absolutely, thanks. It's been reiterated, but in case anybody's come in a little bit later, there might be some content that people find difficult to hear and think tonight. So do whatever you need to do to feel okay for you. Look after each other, and we'll be posting those sources of support. And if you need to step out, that's absolutely okay. But just do whatever you need to do to feel okay this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So I'm back to Siobhan now, because Siobhan wrote a lovely foreword for the book. I was really honoured she did that, because when I was a trainee social worker, Siobhan was someone I looked up to help me work out theory and things. So it was a real honour for her to do that. And so I'm going to hand you over to her just to talk to you a little bit about holding on to hope and death making.
The honour was absolutely all mine, Caroline. Having been a social worker 32 years, training for 4 years, so 36 years altogether, then He Died Waiting is one of the most inspirational books I'd ever read. And to then see that the people who'd contacted you and that collection of stories, that anthology of stories, for me was really so important. But equally as it was important, it was also incredibly difficult to read, very difficult for people to write, very difficult to read. So I'm glad that Emma's just shared with us there about emotional safety for tonight. I think it's also really important to think about your own emotional safety when you're reading the book. And for me, one of the most important things was, having been a social worker for 34 years, you know, with my training as well, 34 years since I first stepped into a placement, a student placement, then how do I hold on to hope? Because we've not been able to disrupt this yet as a profession. We've not been able to challenge this yet. How can I hold on to hope as I'm reading this? I wrote my, when I was qualifying, we didn't have dissertations. It was called an extended essay. You still had to write them with pen and paper. I mean, that's how long I've been around, you know, but my extended essay was written about death making, developed by Wolf Wolfensberger in the 1970s. And I actually do quote that in the foreword, that, you know, in the 1970s, he said that the most subtle and least explicit form of death making of devalued people today is large-scale systematic marginalization of devalued groups, which then results in death. And I think that could have been written yesterday as much as it was written in 1980. And that's the issue, is how do we hold on to hope when services are letting people down so much, when people's whispered lives, as you describe them, are just not shouted about, not, you know, we're not disrupting this really poor quality care that's leading to deaths, that is death making in progress. So trying to hold on to hope was really important. What I think about all of your writing, and what I think about the way that you've pulled, that you and Emma have pulled the collection together, is there is a golden thread of hope running through it. In the same way, to use the metaphor of the stitching and the hearts that each person bore, there is this golden thread of hope. And I think that that's really important. And I'm hoping that as we go into the launch today, all of us, each of us, can hold on to that hope for change, but also each of us has a responsibility. Hope isn't just a desire. Hope is a course of action. Hope involves doing something. And I think that really comes through clearly in the book. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you, Siobhan. Yeah, I it really captured what it was all about for us. So I'm going to sort of talk you through sort of some slides. It was very difficult for a lot of the contributors to participate tonight. It took enormous courage for them to write their stories and share their stories, and Emma and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to help them do that in ways that was safe for them. So I know there are people that are just in the general audience tonight, and there are some that have come onto the panel, but I wanted to really kind of honour the courage that's taken them. So you'll see a lot of pictures of the hearts that are in the quilt. So I've illustrated tonight with that. And that is actually a picture of my son Tim in his top hat and the label he acquired after he died. And there's I talk about in the book the idea of a special death, which is something that Margaret Holloway, a social worker, talked about in the early 2000s, that really hasn't been taken up by professionals, because I suspect it talks about something that people don't want to hear about. And special deaths are those deaths that are particularly hard to grieve, where there might be some trauma. There might be traumatic deaths. The person might have died prematurely, they might have been stigmatized in their life, or the people that are left behind are stigmatized. So deaths by suicide, deaths due to drug and alcohol, and a whole raft of other deaths fall under that category. And so one of the whole sections of the book is the stories of loss, and they would all come under that category of special deaths, being uniquely painful in a specific way. All deaths are painful, but there is something around this group of deaths that's like the last taboo, where it's still not talked about. So I'm now going to hear from Julia.
Hello, my name is Julia. My name is Lydia in the book. I wanted to come forward now to show you who we are. We have faces. When we lose loved ones in this way, we often wait years for the inquest process to conclude. And we can't really speak during that time. It's incredibly challenging because speaking helps us to heal. It's deeply important to me that we speak and communicate with the wider world in order to reach an understanding about what we have been forced to experience and forced to learn. We know what needs to happen now in order to prevent the relentless mental illness conveyor belt that takes our precious children and robs them of their lives. I've seen this both in my family with Chris and also with the many families of the young people I have tried to advocate for over the years, in the face of terrifying systemic failures in meeting their needs and the impact that this has upon them. If we can't talk about it and reach our government, then it goes on and on. And it doesn't have to be like this. I don't want to tell you our story. I want to blank it out. I don't want to weaponize it, even for the purposes of learning. It's too devastating. This is why I wrote of our love for Chris and of many of the good times that we all had. I wrote mostly of the essence of Chris. I thank the coroner for concluding Christopher's inquest and making it clear that Chris was not just defined by his autism, but also by our limitless love for him. But love is not enough. In Chris's name, and that of all the others, please, let's truly reform mental health care. Let's do it with those with lived experience, genuinely at the absolute centre, and with the acceptance of cutting-edge science. Let us demand and insist upon human rights for our communities with additional needs such as autism, who suffer mental ill health that is utterly preventable, but who we have abandoned to an inevitable and devastating fate. I thank everyone who takes the time to read this valuable and era-changing book. It's your silent prayer to those we have lost, and our prayer for our vulnerable loved ones to be safe.
So thank you, Julia, for recording that. I can't watch it. Every time I watch it, it makes me feel so emotional, because I have sat with so many people like Julia and listen to these stories. And Julia's chapter in the book is beautiful. It's a love letter to Chris, and it's so moving. So, you know, read it. Okay, so now we're going to hear from Rebecca, who's going to read a little tiny excerpt from her chapter.
Thank you, Caroline. The aftermath. When Elspeth died, Why does every sentence I begin start with those 3 words? An event that was so catastrophic that it blew my very existence into 2. My life was torn apart into the before and the aftermath. And I find myself here 8 years on, living in that debris, still trying to process and make sense of what is still unfathomable. When Elspeth died, I not only lost my daughter, but my identity as a mother and as a woman. I lost my confidence, my career, my friends, members of my family, and probably my mind. Of course, there's only so much time you can spend howling on the floor. And I think this is something the non-bereaved don't understand when they tell you how brave you are. Because bravery implies choice, but there is no choice involved here. You have to get up at some point and you have to carry on living. And we suicide bereaved people do that, carrying with us all that trauma. And usually we are unsupported because a broken health system does not adequately look after the families who are left behind.
So I've just paused for breath there. Thank you, Rebecca. That's such a moving piece, and any of the bereaved families I encounter would relate to that idea that life before and life after, we're changed and there isn't the help and support that people need. And we're really hoping that this book is going to challenge people to think about how they do manage that. And Rebecca's chapter's got a really interesting piece where she describes getting chucked out of mental health services for saying the system is shit, when the system is shit. And she wasn't criticising any individual, she was criticising a system that had endless waiting lists and endless referral loops. But eventually, Rebecca has sort of picked herself up, and she is been a wonderful inspiration and friend to me. She inspired me. She was an innovator with the Greater Manchester Speak Their Name quilt, where she got people who'd been bereaved by suicide together through lockdown to create the most amazing quilt that's been used to raise awareness, and that's been replicated elsewhere, and I'm sure will be replicated again. And then she opened the Big Fandango, and it's on my 2023 wish list is to get to the Big Fandango and do a joint workshop there. And it's a unique creative arts project on her local high street, where she does suicide prevention work and also does lots of supporting of people who've been left behind. So she offers hope to others. And now we're going to hear from Emma, who's going to, no, we're not going to hear from Emma. I need to follow my own slides, don't I? So Stories of Hope, that's the next big section in the book. So yes, there are the sad stories, the special deaths, and then we've tried to kind of say, look, there is hope, and there's some practical ideas in there. So we know people find it very difficult to talk about death and dying, and they don't know what to say to people, particularly if those deaths are taboo deaths. So we have a whole variety of chapters in there, but I'm just picking out 2 now. So one is Frances, who's a bereavement counsellor, who talks about why we need to talk more about death and dying, and her chapter's full of really wise advice about how you might actually just respond to somebody kindly, compassionately, and with love. And the other chapter, The Beast of Grief, is by Lucy, who is a funeral director, and it's been fascinating that through this book my own learning has grown. And there's a chapter by a young lady called Laura, and she talks about the only help and support coming from the funeral director, which led me to explore that. And Lucy's chapter is full of innovative ideas for suicide. There's not only a funeral director, but they're doing suicide prevention work, and they're doing support for bereaved families in quite different ways. So there's lots of things in the book about that. And now we're going to hear from Emma, who's just going to read a tiny bit from the chapter Holding On to Hope.
Thank you. Hope is powerful. It strengthens, inspires, and brightens. If we hope, the impossible can become possible, and we can hold on through the most difficult times. Hope cannot solve every problem, neither does it erase pain, but it can carry us through dark places. Sometimes people who are in mental distress, grieving or depressed can lose hope. These are the darkest times when no way forward is visible. This is when we need people to hold hope for us. There are numerous examples throughout the book of people holding on to hope for others.
Thank you, Emma. And we think, Emma and I, we think that contributing to the book was an act of hope. We think that everybody that took the time and effort to contribute in whatever way, and some people wrote and some people talked to us, some people made hearts, some people supported with practicalities, some people helped us with things like proofreading. Whatever they did, it was an act of hope from people who thought things can get better, that there is a possibility that it doesn't have to be this way. We also know that for some of the writers of the chapters, the doing of it, the finding their expressing themselves was an act of hope and a therapeutic act in itself. And Heidi says this, that writing about Sam's life was cathartic. The book has given us back a sense of purpose and an outlet to continue our love for him. And the love for the families is the thing that keeps coming through all the way. There isn't a chapter in there that isn't bursting with love. And Sam's heart here was made by his mum, and like the hearts were also different and beautiful in their own way, and you've got coloured pictures of them in the book, but this one has lots of little bits from throughout his life that are really meaningful. Now we're going to hear from Lynn. So Lynn recorded a piece about her son John, and she's talking about what it is she wants to see. So we kind of hoped in the book to not just say what was wrong, but to give some ideas about what's needed. And this is Lynn's views.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Lynn, and I wrote the chapter for They Died Waiting, which has the title When Time Runs Out. And that was in memory of my son John. And Caroline has asked me to say a few words for this evening's launch of the book. When Caroline invited me to provide a chapter for They Died Waiting, I saw an opportunity to join the voices of John and myself with those of the other contributors in order to create a more powerful force for change than we could achieve alone. Each chapter highlights the vital importance of person-centred mental health care, with support being immediately available from the point at which it becomes needed and for as long as it is needed, with that need being a lifelong one in some instances. Putting people on a long waiting list simply isn't good enough, because that will often trigger significant risk to life scenarios as people's mental health continues to deteriorate. Discharging people from services when they are deemed to have recovered because they have achieved an outcome that is enabling them to sustain a better quality of life has a fundamental flaw. The oversight being that it is the support that is being provided that is enabling the perceived recovery. Without that support, there will be significant potential for gradual relapse. Early intervention and prevention is of crucial importance, which is why adequate funding resources need to be allocated without exception to child and adolescent mental health services, also known as CAMS. Careful consideration and support should be routinely given when young people transition to adult mental health services. Extremely high prices can be paid by everyone when windows of opportunity are overlooked. The current cost of living crisis and the inevitable negative impact that this will have on the funding that is available for the delivery of essential mental health services is a source of huge concern for me. From my point of view, the combined tragic stories of our loved ones form just the tip of a gigantic iceberg, the full extent of which has yet to be measured.
And in Lynn's chapter, she talks about the work she's gone on to do with her local mental health trust, and how she's using her experiences very wisely to challenge professionals to work better with people and to take proper notice of people like John who are at risk of dying. And it was really hard for tonight to just choose just a few people to highlight from the book. There are a lot of very different contributions in the book that covers a range of different mental health conditions, a range of situations and ages. But there are many, many Johns, sadly. And one of the key things then about that comes through in the book, you'll see it as a theme, is how invisible and ignored and excluded people can feel who are trying to keep themselves alive, their carers can feel, and then when people are left behind. So our hope, one of our hopes, Emma and I, is that the book will lift people's voices. We're not giving people a voice because they already had a voice. And if they weren't exercising it, that says more about the stigma and oppression and prejudices of society than it does about their ability to speak. And you can see in that picture there, Emma and I are sitting with the quilt in what's going to be Emma's community cafe, where in the locality where she lives, they'll be reaching out to people with all sorts of wraparound stuff for mental health support for their area. And our book, it's co-produced in a really genuine way, in that everybody in it has got lived experience. And although I coordinated it and edited it, very much all the contributors helped me decide and shape what that was going to look like. People had lots of ideas about how I could do it and how I could do it better. And I hope I listened to them and tried to pull those ideas into a cohesive whole. But this is kitchen table publishing, just like He Died Waiting was. There's no budget other than my savings. There's no marketing team, no comms team, there's no editorial team. There's no distribution team. It really is just going along on a tide of goodwill. And I think that's been so heartening that people have invested in the work we're trying to do in all sorts of different ways. They've invested in with their love, with their kindness, with their skills. So everything that happened because it was friends and people that we got to know through social media, and who said, well, I can help you with this bit and I can help you with that bit. But some doors are still closed to us. You know, we haven't got a budget. We can't go and speak at conferences. It costs a vast amount of money. If we had a patron, we could. That kind of leaves us feeling a little bit patronised, I guess. But it's really, really difficult for us as independent publishers, people with lived experience, and this book is absolutely bursting with raw lived experience, the stuff that every organisation would say they want to hear. But it's still really difficult for us to get out there. We're reliant on everybody helping us spread the word. So now we're going to hear from Lisa, who's reading from one of her chapters, Blinded.
Thanks, Caroline, and such a privilege to be here. It's so fabulous that we've connected and to see so many people from Northern Ireland, because these issues are just universal, really. So I'm reading from my chapter called Blinded. I will never forget reading the words in Caroline's first book, where she spoke about Tim and others leading whispered lives. I felt seen and immensely sad. My throat filled with unfallen tears and the countless words I had never been able to speak. My body told the story with desperate acts of self-harm and suicide attempts. Visions and voices no one else could see or hear. It's a very lonely place. Caroline's words also brought renewed hope and determination in my own work. I was reminded that others that I've met on my journey do understand the heart of the matter, because only the heart can brave the darkness and unknown and see with kindness. This is a part of who I am, someone who went into mental health services at the age of 14 and has yet to leave. But it's different now. I've had multiple diagnoses and spent too many years contained in inpatient psychiatric units where scant resources and inadequate knowledge, coupled with over-medication and electroconvulsive therapy, compounded my trauma. I was slowly dying, but things have changed. I am so much more than any label, judgment, assumption, or thing that has happened to me. It's important to reflect on how, sometimes unintentionally, services can dehumanize people, strip us of our personhood. We become risk assessment and case notes, problems to be fixed through service provision that's narrowly defined by the service, rather than relationships being nurtured in conditions where the inherent worth and potential of each person can flourish. Curiosity about the language familiar to us is needed because words can take on different meanings depending on people's experiences. Who is writing our story? What is the language of our organizations and the language we use to define ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Really key thing, who is writing our story? And in this book, people have been able to write their own stories, and I'm really proud, and I know Emma, we're really proud of that we've worked really hard to help people tell their stories without sanitizing them. They're very real and raw. So Lisa also co-wrote one of the chapters with me through a trauma lens, because Lisa does a lot of work training people on how to be trauma informed. She's an amazing trainer, and I'm hoping to be able to come over to Ireland and do something with her soon. And we've got guidance in the book about how to read it in a trauma informed way. So in one of the introductory chapters, it literally talks you through how you might approach reading some of this difficult material in a way that's safe. But we also are really challenging about the fact that we do need to read it. You know, students and practitioners shouldn't shy away from it, because the people who are living these experiences cannot walk away. That's the life they're living. Rebecca talked about having no choices. This idea of bravery implies choice. When someone dies a mental illness related death, it's not a choice that the bereaved have made, and they're thrust into a brutal process afterwards. And we need to think more carefully about how we respond to people with that. So that brings us on to the sort of towards the end of the book, we start thinking about the different ways people agitate for change. So yes, we've got campaigners, really pleased to have campaigners who are talking about their campaigns and what they're trying to do to make a difference. And Emma, my co-editor, loves a megaphone and a placard. That's her thing. I call her a seasoned activist, whereas I'm a bit of a accidental. She's a seasoned campaigner and I'm an accidental activist. So what I love about the chapters that the different campaigns have written is they talk about the soft underbelly. They talk about the why they do what they do. I think it's very easy to look at people with their megaphones and think they just want trouble. But actually, everybody that's part of that comes from a place of understanding the devastation of these loss. And I think we've got Melanie couldn't be here tonight, Melanie Lay, but she's written a chapter, and she was in the news yesterday where an MP had to stand up and say they were right and I was wrong and we're sorry, because she's spent years trying to get them to listen that people are dying in her neck of the woods, and they were wrong and they should be sorry and they should listen. But that kind of activism is not the only way to agitate for change. So I say I'm an accidental activist. I really get very uncomfortable at that stuff. And so we've got people in the book talking about very gentle ways of agitating for change. Some of it's through their examples of good practice, that they're kind of saying this is what it should look like and we're modelling it. And one of the things that I think is very unusual in a book to have people with lived experience, carers, bereaved people. We've got mental health nurses, a retired psychiatrist, campaigners sitting alongside journalists, all talking about the same issue from different perspectives. And local journalists are really instrumental in flagging up what goes on and uncovering some of the stuff that goes on. And Nikki, who's a BBC health correspondent, wrote a chapter, and she just says this about her heart there. This heart is not whom I have lost, but the sheer number of strangers who've opened their hearts to share their loss with me. Poor mental health surrounds us all. Journalists need to be independent, but we have a heart that reflects a need to document the truth, to try and make a difference. And I, for one, have heard, you know, journalists and the media, oh, we wouldn't be in this mess if it wasn't for the media already, or, you know, already showing what's going on, or, gutter press. And what's wonderful when you read Nikki's chapter is you see her heart, why she does what she does. Actually, she does what she does because she wants to make a difference. And also she talks about the impact on her of going in to so many homes where people have had these devastating losses and travesties of justice, and she has to go in there to be professional, but actually she might go back to her car and have a cry because it's really tough stuff. So we're really grateful to our journalist friends who've supported us. Now we're going to go into a slideshow that Heidi's going to narrate for us, and then a slideshow that's going to be set to a piece of music. So I'm just going to play it and we'll see where we go.
Hi, my name's Heidi. I'm Sam Gomm's older sister. Love Will Find a Way is the chapter that I wrote about Sam's life and the events leading up to his preventable death. Sam was a talented musician and he died aged just 43, having survived aggressive blood cancer, child sexual abuse. He had some learning difficulties and he was likely autistic too. These traumatic events triggered his bipolar and he self-medicated with alcohol towards the end of his life. At his 3-day inquest, we learnt some shocking facts, including incorrect medication, repeated cries for help, no communication or information sharing between the various professionals. However, the coroner denied an Article 2 inquest, which is an inquest where failures identified could be shown to breach Sam's right to life. So we sat through a whitewash of an inquest where professionals gave evidence to protect themselves, their egos and their poor judgment. Only one person in the whole 3 days said sorry for your loss, and the coroner made our barrister cry. As an ex-health professional myself, I've reflected on how the system should change. It's not person-centred, it's like painting by numbers, where each number corresponds to an assessment of the person. For example, number 1 could be capacity, number 2 diagnosis, number 3 care needs, and so forth. The complexity of Sam's case was never going to fit into a painting by numbers style system. The system only works if the client is compliant and engaged, which doesn't happen often much with mental illness and autism. It relies on a person being able to help themselves and able to understand the lingo, knowing your rights better than they do, and finally having the money to build your own care package and/or rehab. If a person can't do these things, then there's no help. Sam was painting his own canvas, but everyone else failed to interpret what they were seeing. If they had built the services around his canvas, he would still be here today. He really didn't want to die. Sam's life was so colourful, creative, extraordinary, and full of people who absolutely loved him to bits. Sam died waiting to be listened to and understood. Sam's music lives on. Love Will Find a Way is the title of the last song he wrote, hence the title of the chapter in the book. The song you're about to hear is called Waiting for the Sun, which he wrote just after being told his cancer was melting away like snow in the sun. Please help Sam live on by listening to more of his songs on YouTube. He had the most amazing voice. Let his music remind you why we need to fix our broken system.
People like you and me, living so differently. Every boy, every girl, So call it reality. I'm searching for sanity, lost in my own little world. 'Cause I'm waiting for the sun to shine down on me. You gotta believe that I'm waiting for the sun to melt away the snow. It's making my life grow. Give me the chance to live with you, my heart I give. Don't wanna hurt you, it's true. Hold on to dreams today. Don't let them slip away. I know that's what I should do. 'Cause I'm waiting for the sun to shine down on me. You gotta believe that I'm waiting for the sun to melt away the snow. It's making my life grow stronger. I just need you to know. Closer, I can never let go. Brighter, just keep the sun shining on me. I'm waiting for the sun to shine down on me. You gotta believe that I'm waiting for the sun to melt away the snow. It's making my life grow.
Might just want to pause there and let that sink in a little bit. And if you want to respond in the chat, that would be lovely. You might want to remember a loved one. You might want to offer a message of comfort to someone. Because the book is about the people that have been lost. They are at the centre of our book. It isn't a book seeking fame and fortune. It's a book where precious lives have been lost and those that have left behind want to make a difference for other people so that it doesn't happen to them. So now I'm going to ask Siobhan to just talk through a little bit from her experience about why the book should be used and how it should be learning. Sorry, that was a cat that decided to jump up. That was Astra, sorry. Yeah, and I'm just mindful of what Julia said about how we shouldn't weaponize the book for learning. Emma often talks about not asking people to parade their grief to organisations so that they learn what they need to do. So Siobhan, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. I think that that's really important to say that these stories are not for learning. These stories are stories of loss, of love, of hope, of preventable death. But we can learn from them. And I know I write about social work theory a lot. People know me because I write about social work theory. And for me, this book is a book brimming with theory, but it's theory that comes from people's lived experience. It's theory that comes from what has happened and is happening for people. Theory isn't something that should come from above and be given to us and something that should be done to people. There's been so many mentions of theory already tonight when we talk about person-centered practice and what does that mean. person-centered practice is not something that we read about in a book and do to people. Person-centered practice is what's in this book. So for me, the book is just so important, so vital. I think when you talked about it as kitchen table publishing, Caroline, that really struck home, because the book that Wolf Wolfensberger wrote about death making, no one would publish it. He had to publish it himself in the 1980s. And still, this is kitchen table publishing, still, you know, 40 years on. Where's the power behind this? But the power is the voices. And I think for me, I would much prefer that students were to buy this book and learn from this book than any dry theory textbook. So for me, this is just a book full of learning. But I've also watched some of the students who are here on the panel tonight and seen them writing down quotes. And I know those quotes are going to come out in essays, and that's where it should. The whispered lives need to be written about, shouted about. They need to form our professional knowledge base. And so for me, it's a really important book. And I know, Chris, that you've read the book too and feel very strongly as well about it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been working my way through. I haven't read everything yet because I'm having to take it in stages, as I think quite a lot of people will. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Siobhan, and I've been recommending it to students because I'm training as a practice educator, so I'm recommending it to the students that are around in our team. And what really struck me reading the bits that I have read is that the courage and the resilience of the authors, the contributors, is just immense. And, you know, as professionals, we've really got a duty to engage with those stories to make sure that our practice is a true reflection of what the person would want. We talk about person-centered care and planning and, you know, all of that, but actually, you know, we need to really do it and not be tokenistic about it. We have to strive for empathy. That's a really big thing for me. And, you know, people will know that I talk about empathy a lot, and actually really make time to really listen, to really understand the lessons that are held within these stories, because there's no truer way to learn them from people's real experiences. I would say that the book is absolutely a must read for practitioners and for students in all health and social care settings, because I think, you know, we all, whatever our roles, we all have something to learn from it, because all our roles fit together, and, you know, we all have a duty to make sure that that's going to really work for that individual.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, both of you. So we are developing some resources to support people to use the book. We've already got beautiful postcards that are on the website. So each of the wonderful hearts that were made has got its own postcard with quotes from the book. They're beautiful postcards that you could send to people. They might offer a challenge or comfort to someone. They'll also make great things for discussion starters and to get people's notice. We've also the musical slideshow to Waiting for the Sun. A similar version of that is available on the website, and the proceeds of that are going to be split between the different people that are doing charitable things, the contributors. So lots of the contributors have got charitable things and things they're trying to do to make a difference. So that's where that will be available for anyone to buy. It's only £2 and use. Show it to people, show it to your students, show it to your colleagues, show it to your team, show it to your neighbours, your friends, your family. And we'll be developing more supporting resources as we go along. I'm going to now ask Rachel to read this tiny bit from her chapter. Her heart represents how when her daughter was sent 300 miles away from home, she literally felt like a piece of her heart had been ripped out. Rachel.
I believe in the possibility that the world, and indeed our corner of the world, can be a better place for all of us. For this to happen, ordinary people like myself need to speak out and challenge the status quo.
Thank you, Rachel. And Rachel is one of there are a couple of chapters where people haven't lost someone, but that's been down to luck. And they've certainly know other people that have not been so lucky. Thank you. And now Dave is going to read some thoughts that Billy, who wrote one of our chapters, had to say about some things he thought about afterwards that he would like to have said. Dave.
Billy's chapter in the book is called If Only We Knew. Billy was interviewed by Caroline about the death of his wife, Karen. Billy has some things he wants to say, and I'll just read them briefly. So this is me reading his words. I feel there are learning points that could come from my wife's death. Although I don't hold out much hope because it's always the same things said, we are learning the lessons, but nothing changes. Like many people, my wife's mental health problems stemmed from being abused as a child. She felt ashamed and kept it a secret. What we need to learn is that it is not just public services that need to change, it is also the public's views on child abuse. The victim should be treated as the victim, not shunned and stigmatized by society. It is not the victim who should feel ashamed. And they shouldn't be blamed or looked down on for their mental health difficulties. However, in recent years, things are changing thanks to important figures in our society speaking out, sharing their experiences of sexual abuse, which has in turn had devastating effects on their mental health, has raised awareness. If only people could be encouraged by all those around them to speak openly when abuse happens, it might mitigate against future mental illness. A little kindness would go a long way. It's a gorgeous few words he put together, and I'm very privileged to read them for Billy. I hope he's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That was lovely, and yeah, there's just so much. Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. So we're sort of beginning to get towards the end now, and I just wanted to run through some of our plans. We've got many plans. I've mentioned Emma's going to be opening a community cafe in Norwich, and she's been on the picket lines today. You'll see when you read the book that Emma is a real trade unionist, and she uses politics a lot to try and make a difference. I'll be delivering workshops and speaking at events, and we'll be doing some of this with some of the other contributors, which is going to be very exciting for me to be able to do some collaborative work with them. And if anybody wants to book us for gigs, get in touch. The book contributors I've mentioned, they've got various projects. They've got some lovely projects people are involved in. There's such creativity and imagination that's come out of such devastation. And as you read the book, you'll find in the footnotes links to the different things people are doing. So do please follow them up and support those projects if you can. Siobhan and I are partway through writing a book, Heartwork, where we're talking about the importance of love and kindness in social work. I think as I've got to a certain age and a certain stage in my life and career, it's becoming increasingly obvious to me that actually things like love and kindness are the things that will really make the difference if we're going to make change. So I'm excited about that. Emma and I would like to finish this trilogy. We have lots of ideas, and we have contributors that would like to contribute that we didn't have space for in They Died Waiting, but we've got to pay the costs of this book and recover slightly before we can do that. So we would like to write a third book, and if we do, it will be very much a focus on what good practice looks like, what good looks like, and the things that people are doing to make a difference. So watch that space. It's probably be a long time coming, and I think it will probably happen. And I'm very excited. My sort of new news is that the Mental Health Trust in my locality have asked me to lead on a project looking at how they respond to and support bereaved relatives. So Tim died 8 years ago, so that's been a long time coming and is a really important thing to be doing, and I'm really pleased to be able to do that. And we're doing lots of other stuff, so there's loads of things happening, and we will use social media a lot to kind of share that. But all the contributors, whatever they did, whatever they did. And when I say contributors, they might have written, they might have sewn, they might have read for us, they might have talked to us. They're making a difference because we know this book's going to be used to support learning and change. But that has to be done meaningfully. We cannot, as Julia said, weaponise it. We cannot just go, oh, here's a book, we'll use this. Here's some stories, we'll use them. We're asking you to engage with those stories, to think about the stories that the people you encounter might have. Emma and I were talking yesterday with someone. We're hoping to do a piece of work where we're going to be able to help other people tell their stories. But all of you can ask people to tell their stories. You can listen to your neighbours, your friends, your students, your colleagues. You can listen to the stories they've got to tell and respond with love and respond with action, as Siobhan said, with action. So now I'm going to hand over to Emma, who's going to talk to you about how you can make a difference.
As has been posting in the chat as we've gone along, talk to people about the book, let people know about it, please read and review it. Caroline's produced some beautiful materials that can be used for learning, so make use of them. Book Caroline for workshops. I know Caroline is a bit shy about saying this, but that is a learning tool. Caroline has poured her savings into this project, and probably around her feet she's got boxes of books, so she needs to be able to walk around her house unimpeded through boxes of books. So they're the kind of obvious ways. I guess I'd just like to add in a bit of a challenge. I know we have some people here who are commissioners or might be senior within organisations that are providing services. Think about what you read and learn and reflect. And I want to bring it back to that. People shouldn't have to parade their grief to bring about change. If you've not listened to somebody when their loved one is alive and they're trying to keep them alive, why do you think they would want to give you their time? And if people do get round the table, quite often they're the only person sat round a table who aren't being paid. And then it's what happens with that. So I think we really need to think about what we mean by co-production and listening to the voices of lived experience, because a lot of what people have told us so far, it's actually re-traumatizing in the way that it's done. And it, I would say, is not always done in good faith, actually, or in an honest and straightforward way. So that would be my challenge. You know, we're still hearing the same promises that Caroline was told in 2014 when Tim died, that, you know, your loved one's death won't be in vain and we're going to make these changes, and still the same things are being said years later. We can't treat people like that. We have to be honest, and we can't be hoodwinking people in so we can say to the CQC or MPs, oh no, we're engaging, we're working with people. It has to be genuine, and I'm not seeing much of that in very many places. So that would be my challenge about how you make a difference. If you're in a position of power, it's very, very difficult to hold power to account. So we need people within those systems that are powerful to step up a bit more, maybe sometimes put their head above the parapet.
Thank you, Emma. And you can make pledges in the chat. We'll lift them out. I will definitely, I promise you, I will look at the chat afterwards, and you can do it on social media. Any of you, please shout out on social media. And as you start reading the book, as Chris said, it's not a book you can easily read in one sitting. It's full of powerful, emotive accounts, and so it's going to take a while for the first few readers to read it, and we need those readers to show what they think is important, but also to reflect back to the contributors. It would be really lovely for the contributors to know if their story moved someone or made a difference, or they've taken some action because of it. You can either put stuff on social media using the hashtag, or my email is on the end of this, and it's been in the chat. You know, send me an email and I'll make sure I pass those things on. So I talked a lot tonight about love. You know, They Died Waiting is a collection of love stories. Essentially, that's the thread that holds it all together. It's Emma's and our love for other people that has seen us through what has been a really big project, and at times a tricky project. You know, it's not easy. inviting other people's powerful stories of loss into our lives. And I couldn't have done the book without Emma, her wisdom and being able to, although she was supposed to stop me crying, but she was always the one that had a cry when I sent her something. But, you know, we put our emotions into this. I'd really like to thank Siobhan and the team for hosting tonight. They did the most amazing webinars for 2 years, and they did their 100 and they ended. So I really, really appreciate them doing a reprieve and all of the stuff that manages all the technology for this, which is pretty awesome, and the support they gave me to be able to do things like embed videos and etc. etc. They're an amazing bunch of people. I'd like to thank all of our readers and the people who attend events. You know, the book's going nowhere without you. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for coming tonight. But mostly I want to thank all the contributors who bravely shared their stories. We could only show you just a very few of what's in the book. Every single story in the book is equally powerful, important, and full of love. So please do respect and honour that by reading it and doing something about it.